The Norman and Florence Brody Family Foundation is dedicated to exploring topics of national and international importance and is proud to support Policy Watch with Doug Besheroff at the University of Maryland. From the University of Maryland, this is Policy Watch with Doug Besheroff.
The opposite sex. Can't live with them, can't live without them. Communication is often at the bottom of this well-known saying. Simple things like word choice, listening style, and body language can greatly affect how the words that we say are understood. Today, we discuss the different ways in which men and women communicate with Deborah Tannen, acclaimed author and professor of linguistics at Georgetown University. And now, the host of Policy Watch, Doug Besheroff.
Deborah Tannen, welcome to the University of Maryland and Policy Watch.
And thank you for inviting me. I'm so glad to be here.
Well, we're delighted. So for this show, let's talk about your book, You Just Don't Understand. A mega bestseller when you get right down to it, but on sociolinguistics.
That's correct.
Somehow I think if someone asked an editor before you had written this book, well, we're going to have a book that's going to be on the New York Times bestseller list for 4 years?
Nearly 4 years, yeah.
And sell over 1 million copies?
I think over 2 million.
My God, I'm green with envy already. On sociolinguistics, people would say, nah. So let me come right to the point. What do you suppose it is about the book that makes it so attractive to people to want to read?
I think it gives people a way to understand frustrations that they've been living with all their lives. I heard from so many people, I wish I had had this 25 years ago when I got married. Ways of talking that you just took for granted. Your way is right, so if the person you're living with or the person you love or just anybody in your life is doing something different, there's something wrong with them or there's something wrong with the relationship. And maybe secretly there's something wrong with you. So just understanding that some of these frustrations, other people are going through the same thing, and you can understand it in terms of ways of talking, conversational style, rather than psychological explanations.
Well, I can attest to that because I've been reading the book at home, and every time my wife would walk into the room and say the right thing, but I would interpret it the wrong way, I would remember what I had just read. But there's a technical side to this as well, right? I mean, this isn't just Deborah Tannen telling stories. So what's the underlying scholarly scientific theory for the book?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I got my PhD in linguistics at Berkeley. And the concept of conversational style grew out of my doctoral dissertation in my first book for academic audiences. And that was between New York and California conversationalists. And I'll just give you an example of how it can be so technical, but the insight is so simple. Something was going on where in that conversation, the New Yorkers were talking more than the Californians.
No.
Yes.
You have 2 New Yorkers up here, by the way.
So we don't need to worry about this. But frequently, the Californians were having a hard time getting in. Now, I was able to trace it to a very slight difference in how long a pause you think is normal before you know it's the other person is finished and it's your time to begin. So what happens is anytime, and this doesn't have to be New York and California, anytime people have slightly different sense of timing. So let's say somebody's waiting for this much pause and someone's waiting for that much pause. This much pause comes first. So when that happens, you start getting uncomfortable. The other person is not saying anything. I'd better save the conversation by filling that uncomfortable silence, which all along was just the silence they're waiting for to be sure that you're done. Now, so once you know that, it's all quite straightforward, and you're not a bad person. You just have a different sense of timing. And you can stop saying you're not interested in me, and you can stop saying why don't you say anything? I can talk. Why can't you? But now that it's so obvious, yeah, but I didn't really understand what was going on myself until I transcribed the conversation and timed the pauses with a stopwatch. It took me 2.5 months to transcribe that 2.5-hour conversation.
But the biggest frustration, and this book is about male-female, husband-wife, or should I say female-male, wife-husband relations. And one thing that you talk about is something called mega message and message, that there are 2 levels of conversation. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I distinguish between the message and the meta message, M-E-T-A,
Sorry.
message. So the message is the meaning of the words. The meta message is what you think the person is trying to do by saying that. Let me give you a quick example. A woman and a man are having dinner at the restaurant, happen to be married, and he looks at the menu and he says, I'm going to have the steak. And she says, did you notice, dear, they also have salmon? You like salmon. What's the meta message? We all know what the message was. She's pointing out they have salmon. He said, will you please stop criticizing everything I eat? And she said, I'm not criticizing, I'm just suggesting something you might like. Now, I spoke to her afterwards and I said, because I think she was quite sincere. Afterwards I said, now supposing he had said he was going to have the salmon, do you think you would have said, did you notice, dear, they also have steak? You like steak. She admitted she wouldn't. But, so she admitted she was trying to influence him. But her concern was quite different. In her sense, in her idea, there was a meta message of caring. She doesn't want him to have a heart attack. The doctor told him to eat less red meat. His cholesterol was high. So meta message of criticizing or meta message of caring. And that is frequently a confusion, because really both meta messages are there.
And why didn't she just say, dear, you're not supposed to eat red meat?
This is interesting. I'm sure that she thought it was less intrusive, less imposing to say it that way. And there are many instances, and I'm going to be saying things about women and men, and clearly nothing is all women or all men. But there is a tendency often for women to make a suggestion so that you can do it of your own free will, rather than having me impose it on you. And I give you an example of that. Woman, again, the couple, married couple, driving in the car home from somewhere, and the wife turned to the husband and said, are you thirsty, dear? Would you like to stop for a drink? And he said, no. Well, there was a problem already, but he didn't know it yet. So they didn't stop, and then later it turned out that she was annoyed because she had wanted to stop for a drink. Now, he said to me, why didn't she just tell me? Why is she playing games with me? And I said, I don't think it was that she wanted to stop but didn't want to tell you directly, but rather when she said, would you like to stop for a drink, she probably did not expect a yes-no answer. She probably expected something like, well, how do you feel about it? And then she could say, well, I don't know, how do you feel about it? And then they could talk about how they felt about it and make a decision by consensus. So she did not want to stop for a drink if he really was tired. And the meta message that she was concerned with is, she showed she cared what he wanted by asking, would you like to stop for a drink? And when he said no, from her point of view, he sent a meta message, I don't care what you want. We're going to do what I want, which is what she's going to later say when he says, why didn't you tell me? Well, you know, we always do what you want anyway, so why should I bother telling you? The assumption of how you make a decision is what's crucial here. So I think very frequently and again, it tends to be women, but there are cultural differences too, it's more polite to float the idea and let everybody say what they think, so you take that into account when you decide what to do, versus you make a decision. See, I'm not letting you interrupt. Versus you make a decision, and if they don't like it, they'll tell me. So I think when I did not forget about the woman who said, you like salmon, I think she just felt that it was a more appropriate way to question what he had done.
Well, before we talk about the impact of that on relationships, marriages, and so forth, let's talk about sort of where that comes from. Now, you were careful to say it's not all men and not all women, but I dug up the title of an article you wrote for the Washington Post, Talk of the Sandbox, right? How Johnny and Susie's playground chatter prepares them for life at the office. And so, without necessarily talking about the office, we may get to that later, these are patterns of conversation that we see from very early on, right, that distinguish
Yes.
some men from some women, or most men from most women.
Right, right, yeah. The office talk comes from a book called Talking from 9 to 5. But yeah, it's the same thing with anything about gender. You can trace it to kids. And this is research based on psychologists, sociologists, anthropologists that have observed kids at play. So typically, a little girl has a best friend, and they spend a lot of time talking. In fact, it's who you tell your secrets to that is your best friend. So talking makes you friends. Your best friend is the one you tell everything to. And girls tend to play in smaller groups and don't like a girl who tells others what to do. She's bossy. Now, move to the boys. What happens with a boy who tells other boys what to do? Is he bossy? No, he's the leader.
Alpha male, I think.
That's right. Boys tend to play in larger groups. It's the activity that's central. And they are more obviously hierarchical. So there are high status boys and low status boys, and the high status boys will give orders and push the low status boys around. So boys and girls end up with very different sensitivities. People sometimes say women are more sensitive. I think women and men are equally sensitive, but to different things. So many men become very sensitive to any implication they're being put down or pushed around. And they have to be. Because if you don't have high status, you are going to end up being pushed around.
And they're reminded of that on the playground all the time.
That's right.
I don't know too many girls' games, and I'm a little old to even kind of keep track of this, but many boys' games involve choosing sides. And the hierarchy is very clear, because you can either be the last one chosen or not chosen at all. And I think that tends to happen more with boys.
That's absolutely right, yeah, and you compare that to jump rope. It's not that girls are not competitive, but it isn't as on the surface. So absolutely. So you end up with these very different sensitivities where girls and then women are sensitive to being locked out, not being told the secrets. Girls are cliquey, because you can't tell secrets in front of a girl that's not your friend. So the girls will lock out the girls that they don't want to be friends with. And they will end up, you can't come to my birthday party. So you end up with where girls and women are often focusing on the question, am I included or excluded? Are we close or distant? Where boys and men are more focused on the question, who's up, who's down? And this was my explanation, actually, for the question, why don't men like to stop and ask for directions? Which, believe it or not, is now such a truism, but believe it or not, that was never talked about before the book You Just Didn't Understand. And I used it as an example of this. If you stop, let's say, you're driving around, you stop and you say, ask for directions. From the point of view of the woman, you've made a fleeting connection to a stranger, you get where you're going, you really haven't lost anything. From the point of view of the man, you're putting yourself in a one-down position to a stranger. I'm lost, I need your help. And it's just uncomfortable. And many men have said to me, anyway, if I ask somebody he probably doesn't know either, he's going to tell me the wrong thing, so why should I?
Which is partly true if he asks a man.
It is partly true. It is true. But that's the same thing, you see, because the man you ask, he doesn't want to put himself in a one-down position saying, I don't know either.
Well, technology has come to the salvation
to the
of
rescue,
all men.
yeah.
Yes. Let's talk a little bit about how these observations of yours play out in male-female relationships. And not just, a fleeting misunderstanding, but how do they affect an entire relationship?
If you don't realize there are cultural differences, and I mean male-female cultural differences, of course there could be actual from different cultures, you end up really thinking the person doesn't care about you, isn't interested in you. And I'll give an example of a simple one that happens so often but can be so deep. At the end of the day, now perhaps she's been home and he's been at work, perhaps he's been home, she's been at work, maybe they've both been at work, but she'll start saying how her day was, right? Who she met, what they said, what that made her think, what that made her feel, what she ate, maybe what she thought about it. And then she says, and how was your day?
Okay. I read the book.
And then, really, didn't anything happen? Nope, same old rat race. Then they go out to dinner with a couple of other couples. Suddenly, he is regaling the dinner table with something funny that happened during the day. And she's thinking, I'm your best friend. You should tell me first. You know, what am I, chopped liver? Why did you say nothing? And the conclusion can be really overriding, so that many women's biggest complaint about a relationship is we don't communicate. And many men who are parties to the same relationship and the same conversations feels we communicate. You know, I tell you everything that's on my mind. And by communication, he may mean if we have a decision to make, we talk about it. If something, you know, we have a problem, we discuss it. He isn't thinking of this daily report where you are, what you're thinking, as communication, but she is. Because she thought, just as when she was a kid, her best friend was the one she told everything to. Now she has a new and improved version of a best friend. We're going to tell each other everything. And so when he isn't telling her about problems at work or you know, daily things maybe that are bothering him, or just insignificant daily things, she feels we don't communicate. And that can really make you question the entire relationship. And for him, perhaps, and I think many men feel this way, if I'm upset about something at work, when I come home, I don't want to live through it again. You know, I want to leave it at the office. And if he tells her about it, you know, maybe she'll be questioning him, and maybe then she'll ask later, you know, what happened, so that it actually brings it back. And so if she realizes it's not a failing of his caring for her and of the relationship. And sorry, last thing.
No,
and he can stop thinking there's something wrong with her, that she wants to keep going on and on about nothing, right?
Right. You refuse to write a how-to book. But there's a lot of how-to in this book. When I've told people that you're going to be on the show, and sometimes when I'm holding on to the book, people say this book changed my life. So not a how-to, but what are the things to watch out for in interfamily conversations?
Yeah, now truly, just knowing what's going on is the first step. And once they know, then people can find solutions. So for example, the end of the day conversation. Instead of continuing to butt your heads that way, you might decide, okay, he comes home, he needs a half hour where he's not going to talk, and I'm not going to ask him anything, I'm not going to tell him anything. And then we'll talk. Now, maybe he will and maybe he won't want to tell you his day, but at least he'll listen when you tell your day, and you won't draw those negative conclusions. But I have had people tell me that once they understand, then the adjustment is almost automatic. One of the things I found in writing You Just Didn't Understand was when little kids talk, and this is true for girls and boys and males and females at every age, girls tend to do this. Now, of course, we're having an interview, so you are looking at me, but you know, they lean in like that, and they keep looking. And boys will talk like this. So they're sitting next to each other, and they're looking out, but they're not looking. And that often is one of many things that gives women the impression the guy's not listening. Okay, so a student of mine...
He's looking for the elephants or the lions. He's trying to protect the family.
I've heard that explanation, yeah. I've heard that explanation. The student of mine said this explained a problem that she'd had. She would tell her boyfriend she needs to talk to him. He would lie down on the floor, close his eyes, put his arm over his eyes. And she would say, you're going to sleep. And he'd say, no, I'm listening, go ahead. She couldn't believe him. If he was listening, he'd be looking at her. So she learned this in class. She saw the videotape. She told him, now I understand. She explained it. It's this difference, and I'm not going to get on your case. The next time, no, let's have a talk. He started to lie down. Then he sat up, and he looked at her. And she said, well, you know, to what do I owe this? And he said, well, now that I understand why you want it, I'm going to try to do it.
You've called yourself a feminist.
I do.
But many feminists, or some feminists, don't like this book or disagree with it. Why is that?
For many feminists, and I think this was especially true in the early 90s when I wrote that book, to say that men and women were different seemed right there to be working against women for reasons that I mentioned, because if you say it's biological, first of all, there was an assumption that I was attributing it to biology, and then there's an assumption that if you say there are biological differences, it's going to be used against women. I think also there was a feeling among some feminists that my take on it, which is a no-fault approach. Women have a style, men have a style, we run into trouble because our styles are different, felt that I was ignoring social inequality and ignoring the obvious fact that sometimes things happen because women are discriminated against because they are second-class citizens. And that was not my intention, but I think that was sometimes interpreted that way.
And that gets translated sometimes into, well, there's also a power inequality in these relationships.
Yes, ignoring power, yeah.
Yeah.
And I point out that sometimes the explanations that I give do explain why sometimes women end up in that disadvantaged position, even when the intention isn't there to put them in it. So, for example, when you're, if I'm going to make a decision, we have a decision to make, and I'm going to start with general, get your opinion, and you're going to just say what you want, and then I don't know how to move from that to what I want, I will end up getting what I want less often. For example, a woman will be interrupted, for example, if she feels that she has made it clear she isn't finished, she depends on you to give her the floor. Groups of women together will often turn to each other and say, well, Sally, you haven't said much. What do you think? And so if she's waiting to be asked what she thinks, she may never get the floor.
Deborah Tannen, thank you so much for being on Policy Watch here at the University of Maryland.
Thank you.
And now it's time for us to take questions from our audience.
There is one thing relating to your famous example of the couple driving and do you want to stop for a drink type moment. What I think is a propensity of the woman not to respond to the remark or question that is made by the man, or if she's feeling very vulnerable, to think the most innocuous remark is a very directed criticism, to which the response by the man is, I didn't say that. I just said, why don't you wear the green, or whatever. Do you have any reflections on that aspect?
Yeah, if you say, why don't you wear green, you're criticizing. I couldn't resist that. I think what you're saying is really true of everybody, that we react, kind of like what I said, we react to not so much to the message, the meaning of the words, but the meta message, why we think the person is saying what they're saying. And I think often just our sensitivities are different. So I don't think women are more inclined to do that than men, but they may be more inclined to be picking up criticism, for example, about appearance. Any comment about appearance, we're going to think, oh, you don't think I look good, because we're always on view. Men seem to respond more to any implication that they aren't as good at something, they haven't done what they were supposed to do in terms of some obligation or earning money or something like that. And I'll give you a specific example that really helped me understand this. I was talking to a journalist about, I gave the example of, would you like to stop for a drink? And where something may be leading up toward a question that you want somebody to do something, but you're starting vague. And the journalist said to me, my wife does that, and I know what she wants, but I won't do it because she's not asking the right way. And my impulse was to think, what a jerk. At that time, I was writing this book. I only say this because I love you. I was working on a chapter on apologies. Apologies are one speech act where women tend to be more direct than men. It seems that very often, with exceptions, many men don't like to apologize because you're putting yourself in a one-down position. It seems meaningless. It's actions that count. It's just words, I'll just say I'm sorry, but I still didn't fix it, didn't make any difference. So many men have indirect ways of apologizing. And I realized that just as this journalist was saying, I know what my wife wants, but I won't give it to her because she's not doing it the right way, sometimes I know my husband is trying to apologize, but he isn't saying it the right way. I want him to say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, I won't do it again. And he doesn't want to say that. But he's apologetic, and I'm sure he's thinking, as so many men are, of course I didn't do it on purpose. I would never hurt you on purpose. You know me better than that. He has a solution, by the way. He says sometimes, I apologize for everything. If I say in all my books that being indirect is an equally valid way of saying what you want, then indirect apologies are an equally valid way. and that we women really are not fair to insist that guys apologize the way we want them to. You know, if they are showing they're apologetic, we have to accept that. It's tough, but I'm working on it.
What advice would you give to Hillary?
First of all, Hillary doesn't need my advice. I think she's great exactly the way she is. But she does have a challenge that she's well aware of, I'm sure. Way back when when Bill Clinton was running for president the first time, I had an op-ed piece in the New York Times that I called The Hillary Factor. If you recall, she was criticized for wearing a headband. So she stopped wearing a headband and started fixing her hair, and then she was criticized for paying all this attention to her hair and having different hairstyles all the time. And it was kind of a way to get into the challenge facing all women. We have to make decisions about our hair, our clothes, the style we're going to use, and any decision we make is going to be the basis for people interpreting us. We can't be neutral in a way that a man could be neutral.
Deborah, thanks again.
Thank you.
This program was produced by the University of Maryland, which is solely responsible for its content. The Norman and Florence Brody Family Foundation is dedicated to exploring topics of national and international importance and is proud to support Policy Watch with Doug Besheroff at the University of Maryland.